What's up guys, this is Nick. I noticed that there was some play in my steering wheel, meaning I had to turn it a good bit before the wheel started actually turning. Got the car up in the air, and the first thing I noticed is if the wheel was on you, you could grab the wheel at 3 and 9 position. I'm just gonna grab the caliper, but I can push the whole wheel in and out up in the inner tie rod. So that is supposed to be tight, and it's just like that on both sides. So what I then did is I took my pinky and I put it on the inner tie rod, and I put my thumb on the outer tie rod. And doing this, you're able to get a feel of which one that vibration or that impact is coming from when it's bottoming out on whatever it's loose. To me, it felt like the outer tie rod was very tight, and it felt like the inner tie rod was the one that had the slack in it. This is the driver's side inner tie rod that I've already replaced. So this hooks up to the steering rack, and as you can see, there's a little ball in here that allows this to rotate and let the wheel do what it needs to do. And that's no bueno. So the test that I just did showed me that the inner tie rod was bad, and how to test the outer tie rod would be to, with the suspension unloaded, grab the outer tie rod and see if you can wiggle it by hand. This is supposed to be such a tight fitting that it should not wiggle like it's doing right now. I can also see that the dust boot on it is cracked, and there's some sand and dirt in there from just driving around. So even though this is probably tight enough to where you could get away with putting a new boot on it, making sure that it's full of grease and get another 10-20,000 miles out of it, I'm just gonna go ahead and replace it while I'm here because it's already so cheap. I'm not a fan of Advanced Auto Parts because all of the people that work there in my local area aren't too knowledgeable. I like going to places where the people that work there can help me out when I have technical questions. But on their website, they pretty much always have a 20% off coupon that you can punch in if you order their parts online. So you go on their website, fill up your cart with everything you need, you pay for it online, and then you go and pick it up in the store, get 20% off. So I got all new inner and outer tie rod ends for like 60 bucks. On both sides. So I'm gonna go ahead and just swap them all out. So your inner and outer tie rod is tested with this, and to test your ball joint, that is up and down movement in it. So the best way to test for that, and understand that when you have the suspension loaded, you're gonna get more play than with it unloaded. And what I mean by that is, to test it loaded, you jack the car up so that the wheels are off the ground, you put jack stands under the control arms, and you let the car down so that the wheels are still off the ground, but the weight of the car is being held up by the control arms. So the suspension is loaded, the geometry is the same as what it is when you're driving, and that's when you really wanna test stuff. This is so bad that I can see unloaded that it does the problem, but if you test it unloaded and it looks fine, test it loaded. It might give more play than what you see here as well for the ball joint. However, in my scenario, the ball joint looks great. I'm not gonna touch it. And so to test for that ball joint with the suspension loaded or even unloaded, get a pry bar underneath the wheel and pry up and down and see if you can get it kind of to pop or to click up and down. That'll let you know that your ball joint needs to be replaced. So your inner and outer tie rods is what connects your steering rack to your wheels. So when you turn the wheel, it's using that inner and outer tie rod to be able to turn. The adjustment that's on it is necessary to get the wheel straight on both sides, which you'll probably need an alignment after you do this, or to adjust the toe in or the toe out of the car. So this is very important for the alignment of your vehicle. Since I'm going to be replacing the inner and the outer tie rod, and I want the alignment to be as close as possible, I'm going to go ahead and crack this nut loose while everything's still connected, because it's going to be the easiest to go ahead and get it loose now. And then I'm going to make sure that the adjustment of that nut does not get changed at all from the time I take it off of the car to putting the new one in, so that I can line them up and get them to about the exact same length. If you're only going to be replacing the inner or the outer tie rod, then you need to make sure that you mark on the threads where the nut and the threads meet, so that when you install the new part, you get it right up to that point, and when you can at least drive it around pretty accurately before you get it to an alignment shop. These are all the tools that I use to get the driver's side replaced. So I have a 12-inch adjustable wrench, couple of extensions, 1/2-inch breaker bar, always have gloves and rags handy. If you have an impact wrench, then that's definitely the way to go, use that. I have a set of 1/2-inch sockets, some dikes, anti-seize, wrenches, more drivers, a very large hammer, the bigger the better. This is some new parts that I have to replace, and the most important thing on this table is this exhaust pipe, and you will see why. The best advice I can give before you start this job is on this castle nut and any other connections you're gonna have to take off. Go ahead and blast them with PB Blaster many hours before you get started. Not WD-40, you want a penetrating oil that's actually gonna be able to get down into the threads and help loosen it up. I promise you this connection hasn't been done in a very long time, and the reason I'm doing it while it's all still connected on the car is to hold everything on either side tight. All right, so that's loosened up. Next step is to get this castle nut off. Oops. The cotter pin's out. Now I'm gonna hit this with an 18mm socket on my impact. If you have a 1/2" driver or something like that, it'll definitely get the job done. This is just a little bit easier. So what a lot of people are gonna show you is you wanna keep the nut on this right here, and then you wanna bang around the spindle and it'll just drop right out. Let me tell you, that is not gonna happen. Maybe if your tie rod end has 5,000 miles on it, but if it's been in the car for a long time like this one, that's not gonna be the scenario. So what we need to do is get a pickle fork and pry it out. So I can see with the angle I'm at with the pickle fork right now, it's actually hitting the spindle, so I'm gonna have to go from a little bit different of an angle to prevent that. Not gonna be able to get past this point much. And what our goal is right now is to drive this pickle fork as far in as we can hammer it, and if that doesn't pop it out, we'll hit down on it. I'm gonna be reusing this boot. It is something you can replace, but I'm gonna take it off as delicately as possible, so that'll be good. What I'm gonna do is hit the area in front with some WD, and then I'm gonna clean it up as much as I can so that this boot's gonna easily be able to slide this way. Here's the clamp. So now we come over here, and there's this clamp up top that in order to remove, we have to get a flathead in it and pry it up to loosen its hold, and then we'll be able to slide it out. This is gonna be different on every car, so just look at what you have and use your brain to try to figure out what's gonna be necessary to remove it. Some people choose to cut these. I'm gonna be using a zip tie as a replacement for this, so I don't really care about the condition of it, but I do believe I just got it removed enough to where we can pry it off now. So now I'm gonna get this boot to slip over this higher portion of the tie rod. Gonna work a small flathead in there. Twist it, yeah, there you go. Came over the lip. We're gonna pull this as far this way as we can. And that's gonna give us access to remove our inner tie rod. So as you can see, Ford has blessed us with this beautiful little rivet to make sure that we can't remove this. So what you can do is drill it out, pry it out, or you could actually just put so much force on it that you break the rivet and unscrew it with it still in place. I did that on the other side, and it did damage the threads very slightly. It worked perfect. The threads weren't bad enough for me to not be able to get everything on there tight and secure, but it's not what I want to do on this side. On that side, it was up against the frame back here, and I wasn't able to get to it, but we're going to do what we can on this side to get it gone. Alright, so we got our 12-inch adjustable wrench on here. We're going to take our exhaust pipe to get extra leverage. And boom. Easy as butter. Oh. Setting both of these up next to each other, standing up as straight as possible, and I'm comparing the length of these threads right here and trying to get them as close as possible. Alright, I'm happy with that. So now what I'm going to have to do is disconnect this so that I can take the boot off. We're going to clean it, transfer it over to this one, and go throw it back in the car. All right, so before I took this boot apart, I marked where that nut was in correlation with the factory stuff, and I made sure that I get it tightened up. It's back in the same spot. Make sure before you install the tie rod end that you also install this nice little factory clamp that was there. You could use a zip tie, but I like this clamp, so I'm gonna reuse it. You can see the boot cleaned up beautifully. It's in perfect condition. It's good to at least make sure you clean your boot before you install it, because when you start cleaning it and scrubbing into it, you'll find any weak points or areas that may be ripped or something. This thing looks perfect, so we're gonna throw it back on the car the same way it came out. Let's get to it. Before you install these, please make sure you think about the next time that you're gonna do this and use some anti-seize. I used it on the threads that are in here so that hopefully in the future when this ever needs adjustment for an alignment, it's gonna be super easy. Now let's compare this brand new tie rod end and inner tie rod end with the ones that we pulled out. So this one, it takes a good bit of force to get it to move, but you can move it by hand. This one, it's not going anywhere. So a problem that you may have when taking off the castle nut for this is this may be so loose and worse than mine to where this thing actually spins as you're trying to take off the threads. The solution there is you cut off the boot with a pair of dikes or tin snips or something like that, and you grab what you can down here with vice grips and try to keep it from spinning as you remove the bolts up top. Here is the factory inner tie rod end, and as you can see, it is toast. This new one, I can't even twist it if I wanted to or bend it or anything. It is very, very tight. This is how it's supposed to be. Once again, if it had about as much play as this one did in terms of how hard it was to turn it, that'd be borderline of you wanting to replace it. This was absolutely toast. So very good that we replaced those on the car, because it is possible that this socket gets so worn out that this ball could just completely pop out of here, and then your front wheel is just gonna, you'll be driving on the highway and your wheel could just turn all the way, and that is very dangerous. So let's get it back in the car. So where the factory tie rod end had this little rivet that was holding it in, this has two Allen heads that are getting screwed in. They're 2.5 millimeter. I would not recommend getting those any tighter than you're comfortable with, because when these get removed and maybe let's say it doesn't get touched for 10 years and someone goes to remove them and they're rock solid, they're rusted, they're tiny, and it's an Allen that strips extremely easily. Don't get them too tight. Just get them snug enough to where they're gonna hold, even if both of them back out and fall. If you torque this to the correct spec, you're gonna be fine. So now what we're gonna do is slip this boot over, throw a zip tie on, hold it on, make sure you clean this boot before you do, and then we're gonna get the tie rod outer end in.
Chooky beep.